Yeah, Myles Simmons, NFL Insider, Pro Football Talk, NBC Sports, Peacock. Make sure you check him out. Myles, let's get into this. The, as you put it, sheer weirdness of this Christian Wilkins situation. You've never heard anything like this. Now, I don't know if you heard what came out of the press conference today, but your take on this first and foremost.
I mean, it's so weird. I mean, and I obviously, as you're saying, well, I work for Pro Football Talk, and Mike Florio is really convinced that the whole kiss on the head is not exactly the entire story of what's going on here. And look, I mean, Pete Carroll said it today. Maybe we'll get the whole story in time. Maybe we won't. I don't know, but you just feel like there's just something strange going on here. And then today, there are the pressers at the Raiders, and I can't remember the defensive tackle's name off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I got a lot of names in my head. But he's talking. Thank you. Adam Butler is saying, hey, if you have something going on in your life, go to therapy. Right. You're like, what?
Yeah.
I don't know what the hell's going on with this, but it is interesting because the Raiders, could have just gone with the story of, hey, he needed another foot surgery and he didn't want to have it. And like that, I'm sure was a factor, right? And Pete Carroll has been talking for months about how it is a, quote, challenging rehab. And there are things that need to happen and all this stuff. And Wilkins hasn't been able to practice since like midway through last season. So that's one interesting aspect of this. But then you add on this layer of, is this bullying? Is this something else? Is there actually a mental health issue going on here? I don't recall ever hearing about something like this before. I mean, the closest thing, and it's not really the same, is like the Richie Incognito-Jonathan Martin situation in Miami. Yeah. And that's even like totally different than what we're dealing with here. So yeah, this is some odd stuff coming out of Vegas. Raiders, never boring. Never, ever boring.
And you just mentioned it, and we've talked about it on the show earlier today. The whole aspect of potentially being mental health issues. We talked about it's not Adam Butler's spot for him to say something of that nature because we've never gotten any sort of reports, or Christian Wilkins has never said he's dealing with that. So for him to come out and say it today, almost like hey guys, he's dealing with something, but he doesn't want to say it, so I'm going to say it. It was very weird.
Yes, it absolutely was. And that's where I hope we get the whole story at some point. I don't know if we ever will, but that's where you look at it. And if it is something like that, then, you obviously want to tread carefully over that kind of thing, because you always want people to be able to get the help that they need. Right. And it can be in any different situation, but I don't know exactly what that means from Adam Butler's standpoint. I really don't. And so that's why, if it's not the actual person who's invoking mental health, then you also are kind of like, well, you don't even know what to say about it. You don't even want to touch it. It's like how Pete Carroll goes today. I don't even have a comment on that. It's like, I guess not, because why should you? I mean, you released the guy, so it's not necessarily your problem anymore.
NFL Insider Myles Simmons, Pro Football Talk, joining us on Cofield Company, ESPN Las Vegas. Myles, Matthew Stafford still week to week with a back injury. Got to be a concern.
It ought to be. And, when you have a team like the Rams, who I think could potentially be at least one of the final four in the National Football League this year, if not representing the NFC in the Super Bowl, and you got a quarterback going into year 17, right? And then you start talking about back issues. Well, has Matthew Stafford been carrying offenses for the last 16 years? Yes, he certainly has. But also, anytime you've got somebody who is, an aging quarterback and you start talking about back issues, that's a concern to me. Sean McVay, is head coach of the Rams, obviously tried to kind of downplay this a little bit. And, he's basically said that, hey, if it were a younger player, right, somebody who didn't have as much experience, and they'd probably be a little bit concerned with the reps that Matthew Stafford is taking, or at this point not taking. But because Stafford has the experience, he's been in the offensive system, kind of the only thing you're missing at this point is the timing between him and a Davante Adams with pads on, and guys are going full speed. My understanding is that the Rams were going to kind of back Matthew Stafford off in training camp a little bit anyway, and maybe have him have a rest every fourth day, and, get him some extra rests in there, because, again, he's going into year 17. But if Matthew Stafford's not practicing by, let's call it the second, third week August, then I think it's like, whoa. That something really could be going on here. And if that's the case, then Jimmy Garoppolo is in line to be the quarterback of the Rams in 2025. And I don't think that's going to make Davante Adams all that happy.
Looking at the Rams offense with Davante Adams and Puka Nacua, is there any separation in terms of who's the one and who's the two, or is this a 1A, 1B situation?
Ideally, it would be 1A and 1B. And, I think back to kind of 21 and about the first half of that Super Bowl that the Rams ended up winning over the Bengals. And yes, Cooper Kupp obviously was their number one guy that year. But Odell Beckham Jr., in my opinion, and I've gone back and looked at the Super Bowl a couple times recently, Odell Beckham Jr. was in line to be the MVP of the Super Bowl because he was going off. And then his ACL went, his knee's gone, boom, and things get a lot closer in the second half. And Cooper Kupp ends up winning MVP. But I think ideally that's the kind of breakdown that you could have where it's, okay, well, if the defense wants to key in on one of these guys, then the other is going to be open. And if they key in on both of them, then that opens up the run game. And when Sean McVay first got to the Rams, a lot of things were really predicated off that run game and Todd Gurley going off and doing all these things and, being effective, not just running, but catching it out of the backfield. And at that point, you had guys like Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp as a young player, Brandon Cooks, Sammy Watkins in 17. And, everything was kind of running off of that. So if you have more than one go-to guy, that really does open up the offense. And because Cooper Kupp could not necessarily be relied upon from a health standpoint, right? Now you get somebody like a Davante Adams who has been excellent, not just keeping his body right. I mean, I know in Las Vegas there were, issues with that, but in also the production, it's just been really, really good for years and years. So that's where I think, it probably is a 1A, 1B situation, but I am interested because Matthew Stafford has a tendency to be a kingmaker, right? Going back to Calvin Johnson, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua a couple years ago as a rookie. I don't know who he's going to be the kingmaker for this year, if it would be Davante Adams or Puka Nacua. I'm interested to see how that goes.